I work on music in Christian communities, and I look at how that activity forms people's ideas about God, about each other, about good, about justice, and I think about how music configures that. I'm Nathan Myrick. I got my PhD in church music from Baylor University. My focus was on theological ethics, and my training is as an ethnomusicologist. So I got into this project trying to answer a question that came out of the research that I did for my last book, which was called Music for Others. And I made a claim in Music for Others that the best way to talk about justice is to talk about flourishing, specifically how Martha Nussbaum describes flourishing as the capabilities and enabling and facilitating the capabilities of each individual within a community to live their best life, to be the best they can be. And I hate that term, living your best life, but there's something that has some currency to it, right? So instead of looking at money, and instead of looking at GDP or return on investment or something along those lines that is built on a monetary system, we decided to look at flourishing as a human value, as something that is inextricably human and necessary for living. Because you can have all the money in the world, but if you can't actually live well with it, it's no good, and you don't actually get any more enjoyment out of this, right? So what we decided to look at was human flourishing, and especially in Christian communities, because whether or not we are religious people, religion and religious communities have a huge role to play in society, and actually are one of the fundamental aspects of a Western society such as we live in. And so looking at the way that music participates in human flourishing in a Christian community provides both a sociological window into a certain demographic, a certain subset of society, but also that subset of society has a lot of interplay and a lot of exchange across the rest of society. And so it's an opportunity to look at both close-up persons, individuals, and the way that those individuals interact with communities, societies, nations, etc. So one of the problems that researchers have is defining flourishing, or not even just defining flourishing, but how do you measure it? How do you quantify it? How do you articulate what the good life is or what thriving existence is? And so we use the capabilities approach that Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen developed as a rubric, as a way of assessing or measuring or identifying the ways that music participates in human flourishing, and indeed in some cases facilitates or enables or configures it. What Nussbaum argues is that there are 10 central capabilities that are necessary for each individual across every society in the world to flourish. And they're broad enough that they can be applied in different ways in different places, but they're specific enough to give you an actual, this is how it works. Because you have to be able to take into account that different people occupy different positions in different societies. For instance, a woman in a patriarchal society isn't going to be able to exercise the same agency that a man is, right? So for our project, we were looking at how the capabilities, the central capabilities, are at play or present in the activity of music making, of singing or of performing, and specifically how that activity of musicking is operative or is in play in churches. So how does worship music participate in or contribute to flourishing in this concept of capabilities within the frame of, all right, acknowledging that everybody's different, acknowledging that everybody has different abilities, different agency, different opportunities. How does musical worship facilitate flourishing? Out of Nussbaum's 10 capabilities, we identified 5 that were at play in congregational music making. We had a number of opportunities to have our assumptions sort of confirmed and then challenged at the same time. But what we ended up finding was that of the 10 central capabilities, there were 4 that really came out, both in the observation that we did and participation in worship, and in the interviews we had with other people. But the 5th one was not explicit. People didn't talk about the 5th capability as much as it was just sort of operating in their conversations and in what we observed. The first 2 really go together, and the first one being capability number 4, which is having thoughts of one's own, free of control and being able to use your own imagination in these spaces. And then the second one is capability 6, and they go together. And capability 6 is the ability to use practical reasoning within that opportunity to use your own mind, to have your own thoughts about something, and to just determine within that practical reasoning scheme what's good. Like, what should I do? What do I believe? And how do these words, for instance, in this song resonate with my beliefs, or do they? And then choosing whether or not you could sing that as an individual who is participating in a community. That was really important. That was something that seemed to really help contribute to or configure the ability of a person to flourish through music in a congregation. The second thing we found was that capability 5, having emotional attachments outside of yourself, was really important to the well-being or the thriving life of an individual in the congregations that we studied. So being able to sing with others and to do so with kind of the depth of one's emotions, to bring the whole aspect of your affective being into the worship service, to sing honestly, both with what you feel and what you believe, was really important. But being able to do that in the presence and company of other people, and to use that as a way to sort of make friends, if you will, to build a community, that was really important. That was something that really contributed to a thriving existence or a flourishing congregation. The other capabilities that we found were the ability to be treated with dignity and to live in a dignified way within those relationships that you develop in a congregation. And as that's applied to music, that really gets into the idea of, can I sing even if my voice isn't the best, or even if maybe I'm out of tune a little bit, or maybe I sing too loudly or too quietly. I don't want to be made fun of. Like if I perceive that my singing, my participation is unwelcome, then that sort of impinges on my ability to relate with dignity and to feel like I'm being treated as a dignified human being. And so the final capability that we identified as being important to human flourishing in congregations is Nussbaum's capability 9, which is play and entertainment. And while we would assume that, of course, people would say when they were interviewed and asked what makes church music good, they would say something along the lines of, well, if it sounds good, like if I can enjoy it, if it's well done, or something like that. But nobody said that. That wasn't even anything that came up in our interviews. But it was certainly something that people inferred and assumed, but were really hesitant to say. So we found that really interesting, and we dove more into analyzing why that might be. Well, we started out by compiling a database of churches in the Macon area. We actually said no more than 30 miles from the Macon campus of Mercer University, and then we built a database. And we actually identified 218 congregations within that radius, and then we vetted those churches based on 6 criteria. So we looked at congregational size, we looked at denominational affiliation, class, race and ethnicity, style of musical worship, and geographic location. We built that database, and then we identified 20 congregations that would represent the diversity of the churches in the area based on those 6 criteria. While we were establishing our research protocols and drawing up the questions and figuring out how we were going to do it, the pandemic hit. And of those 10 churches, 7 were no longer able to participate, either because they weren't meeting, or they had actually just closed their doors altogether, or their leadership was no longer comfortable with having people observe their worship. So we ended up with 3 congregations to study. And those 3 congregations were Vineville United Methodist Church, Highland Hills Baptist Church, and Mulberry Street United Methodist Church here in Macon. While we had originally envisioned a broad study of 20 churches that represented the diversity of congregations in the Middle Georgia area, we ended up with these 3 churches that were very similar in terms of the 6 criteria that we identified, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because it allowed us to go deep on these topics with a relatively focused group of people. And so we were able to draw much closer comparisons and identify a lot of micro differences that matter in individual lives, rather than the big data numbers that might work better for a survey. And I need to say a huge thank you to the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship for their Vital Worship grant, and to the Lilly Endowment for underwriting this project. It has been a huge blessing. I need to say thank you to the congregations and staff at Highland Hills Baptist Church, at Mulberry Street United Methodist, and at Vineville United Methodist Church for their incredible participation and just being willing to put up with us bugging them and watching their services and asking questions of them. And then thank you especially to my research assistants, Jonathan Alvarado and Benjamin Gessner, for their tireless and unceasing efforts. They went above and beyond, and this would not be possible without them.